9,000 Roman soldiers marched into the unknown and never returned. No survivors, no final battle, no bodies, just silence stretching across centuries. In an empire built on discipline, records, and absolute control, this wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. Because Rome did not lose legions without explanation. And yet, one vanished. This is the story of Legio IX Hispana, the Roman army that didn't fall, but disappeared. At its peak, Rome was unstoppable. Its borders stretched across continents, its influence shaping the known world. From the burning deserts of Africa to the cold edges of northern Europe, Rome ruled with precision, order, and force. At the center of that power were its legions, highly trained, ruthlessly disciplined, engineered for war. A Roman legion was not just an army, it was a machine. Every soldier knew his role, every movement was calculated, every command obeyed without hesitation. They built roads, they built cities, and when necessary, they destroyed entire civilizations. Among these legions, one carried a reputation carved in blood and fire. Legio IX Hispana, veterans of brutal campaigns, survivors of relentless wars, a force that had crushed rebellions and brought entire regions under Roman control. They were not just respected, they were feared. But power has a way of creating illusion, an illusion that nothing can challenge it. And far from Rome, beyond the comfort of its order and structure, there was a land that did not bend, a land where the rules were different, a land where Rome would begin to lose control. Britain. Chapter 1: The War Machine. Before it became a mystery, the Ninth Legion was a weapon. Its origins trace back to one of the most violent and transformative periods in Roman history, the rise of Julius Caesar. Rome was not yet an empire, it was a republic fractured by politics, ambition, and war. And in that chaos, Caesar began building something that would change everything. An army loyal not just to Rome, but to him. Legio IX Hispana was among those forces. From the beginning, it was forged in conflict, not trained for defense, but for conquest. The men who joined its ranks were not given comfort, they were stripped of individuality, reshaped into something more efficient, more obedient. Training was relentless. They marched for miles under heavy armor until their legs gave out. They drilled formations over and over again until movement became instinct. They learned to fight not as individuals, but as a single, unified force. Pain was constant, exhaustion was expected, and slowly something changed. Fear began to disappear, not because they were fearless, but because fear no longer mattered. A Roman soldier did not run, he did not hesitate, he followed orders, even if it meant walking straight into death. That discipline became their greatest strength, and nowhere was it tested more brutally than in Gaul. Gaul was not an easy conquest. It was a land filled with tribes, fierce, proud, and unwilling to submit. They knew the terrain, they fought with unpredictability, and they resisted Rome with everything they had.
But the Ninth Legion did not stop. They advanced through forests, across rivers, into fortified settlements. Again and again they met resistance, and each time they crushed it. Villages burned under Roman assault, war cries echoed through the wilderness, steel collided with flesh in battles that left the ground soaked in blood. It was not quick, it was not clean, but it was effective. The Ninth Legion adapted, learned, became harder, stronger, more dangerous. With every victory, their reputation grew. To Rome, they were heroes, symbols of expansion and control. To their enemies, they were something else entirely. A force that did not negotiate, a force that did not retreat, a force that did not stop. And with that reputation came something far more dangerous than any enemy: belief. The belief that they were unstoppable, that no matter the terrain, no matter the enemy, they would always emerge victorious. It was a belief reinforced by years of success, a belief that turned confidence into certainty, and certainty into arrogance. By the time their attention turned toward Britain, the Ninth Legion had already proven itself across battlefields and campaigns. They had faced warriors, they had faced rebellion, they had faced chaos, and they had survived it all. So when orders came to move to the far edge of the known world, they did not question it. To them, it was just another mission, another land to conquer, another enemy to defeat. But Britain was not Gaul. It was not organized, it was not predictable, and it did not fight by Rome's rules. It was colder, darker, wilder. A place where forests swallowed entire groups of men, where thick fog rolled across the land, turning visibility into blindness, where enemies did not stand in open battle, but struck from the shadows, watched from a distance, waited, and attacked when the moment was right. This was not a battlefield the Romans understood, but the Ninth Legion didn't see the difference. Not yet. They carried their confidence with them, their discipline, their belief in superiority. They arrived as conquerors, unaware that something had already begun to shift. Because in Britain, strength alone was not enough. And for the first time, the Ninth Legion was about to face something it could not control. End of Chapter 1. The Ninth Legion had conquered everything in its path, but ahead of them lay a land that would not break, a land that watched, waited, and slowly began to take them apart.
Chapter 2: The Hostile Frontier. Britain was not just another province. To Rome, it was supposed to be a conquest, another territory to absorb, another people to control. But the moment the Ninth Legion set foot on its soil, something felt different. It wasn't immediate. There was no grand battle waiting on the shore, no army standing in formation. Instead, there was silence. A strange, heavy silence. The coastline stretched under a gray sky. Cold winds cut through armor. The sea behind them roared as if warning them not to go further. And ahead, just land, dark, endless, watching. The first marches inland were uneventful, too uneventful. No resistance, no confrontation, just forests. Thick, suffocating forests that seemed to close in around them with every step. Paths that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. The Romans were used to structure, roads, formations, visibility. But here, everything was uncertain. Scouts were sent ahead. Sometimes they returned.
Sometimes they didn't. At first it was dismissed, a lost patrol, a wrong turn, an accident. But then it started happening more often. Men would move just a little too far from the main column and vanish. No screams, no signs of struggle, just gone. The soldiers began to notice. Whispers spread quietly through the ranks. Something wasn't right. But discipline held. Orders were followed, marches continued, because that's what Roman soldiers did. They moved forward, deeper into the land, and that's when the attacks began. Not battles, not organized warfare, ambushes. It happened without warning. An arrow would cut through the air from nowhere, striking a soldier before anyone even understood what was happening. Then another, and another. Shadows moved between the trees, fast, silent, impossible to track. The enemy did not stand and fight. They struck and disappeared. Roman formations, so effective in open combat, became useless in the dense forest. Shields raised against threats they couldn't see. Orders shouted into chaos. By the time they tried to respond, the attackers were gone, leaving behind only bodies and confusion. This wasn't war. This was something else, something patient, something calculated. The tribes of Britain knew the land in ways the Romans never could. They knew where to hide, where to strike, where to vanish. They watched the legion move, studied it, waited for weakness, and slowly they began to exploit it. Supply lines were disrupted. Messengers failed to reach their destinations. Communication broke down. The deeper the Ninth Legion moved, the more they became isolated. And isolation is something they had never truly experienced before. At night, the forests felt alive. The wind moved through the trees like whispers. Branches creaked like distant footsteps. Every sound felt intentional, as if something was always just out of sight. The soldiers stopped sleeping properly. Even the veterans, men who had survived years of war, began to feel it. That tension, that pressure, the sense that they were being watched. Always. Fires burned low in their camps, surrounded by darkness that seemed too thick, too close. No one said it out loud, but the thought was there. They were not in control anymore. And for a Roman legion, that was the beginning of something far more dangerous than defeat. Fear. Not the kind felt in battle, quick, sharp, and fleeting, but something slower, something that stayed, that grew, day by day, march by march, loss by loss. The Ninth Legion was still strong, still disciplined, still capable of fighting, but something inside it had begun to crack. Because this enemy would not face them, this land would not reveal itself, and this war refused to follow any rules they understood. Then came the realization, quiet at first, unspoken, but impossible to ignore. They were not advancing anymore. They were being led, pulled deeper, further away from support, further into isolation, as if something, someone was guiding them exactly where they needed them to be. And by the time that realization fully set in, it was already too late. End of Chapter 2. The Ninth Legion had faced enemies before, but never like this. This wasn't just resistance. This was strategy. This was patience. This was something waiting for the right moment to strike. Chapter 3. Boudicca's Revenge. There are moments in history when control collapses all at once. For Rome, that moment came in the form of a woman. Her name was Boudicca. She was not a queen in the Roman sense, crowned by empire, protected by law. She was something else. A leader forged in humiliation, driven by rage. The Romans had underestimated Britain, but more importantly, they had underestimated what happens when people have nothing left to lose. Boudicca's story did not begin with war, it began with insult. After the death of her husband, a king allied with Rome, the empire moved quickly to seize control. Lands were taken, power stripped, authority erased. And when Boudicca resisted, they made an example of her. She was publicly beaten, her daughters violated. A message from Rome, clear and absolute: submit or be broken. But what Rome failed to understand was that some people don't break, they change. What followed was not rebellion, it was eruption. Tribes that had once stood divided came together, not for power, not for territory, but for revenge. Boudicca didn't just gather an army, she unleashed something far more dangerous, a force driven not by discipline, but by emotion. Anger, grief, fury. And when that kind of force moves, it doesn't stop. The first target was Camalodunum, a Roman stronghold, symbol of control. It fell quickly, too quickly. The defenses were unprepared, the response delayed, the scale of the uprising completely underestimated. The city burned. Buildings collapsed under flames that spread faster than commands could be given. Civilians fled, soldiers tried to regroup, but there was no order, only chaos. And the Ninth Legion was sent to respond. They marched fast, confident, expecting to crush another uprising, restore order, reassert dominance. That's what they had always done. But this time, they were walking into something very different. As they approached, the signs were already there. Smoke rising into the sky, silence where there should have been structure. And then, movement. Not organized, not controlled, but overwhelming. Boudicca's forces didn't attack like an army, they surged from multiple directions, screaming, charging, relentless. The Romans tried to form ranks, shields up, lines tight, commands shouted. For a moment, it held. For a moment, it looked like every other battle. Then the line broke. The sheer number of attackers combined with their unpredictability began to overwhelm the formation. Attacks came from angles they couldn't defend. Speed replaced structure, and structure began to collapse. Roman soldiers, trained to fight in order, found themselves surrounded by chaos. There was no rhythm, no pattern, only impact after impact. Blades clashing, bodies falling, dust and blood mixing underfoot. The Ninth Legion was losing control. Not entirely, not completely, but enough. Enough for something dangerous to happen. For the first time, they were reacting, not commanding, not controlling, reacting. And that shift changed everything. The battle didn't end in total destruction, not yet, but it left scars, deep ones. The Ninth Legion survived, but not intact. Units were shattered, numbers reduced, confidence shaken. They had faced defeat before, but not like this. This wasn't a tactical loss, this was something psychological. Because for the first time, they had seen what it looked like when Rome's system failed. When discipline wasn't enough, when fear didn't belong to the enemy anymore. It belonged to them. The Boudicca revolt continued. Cities burned, Roman presence weakened. And though Rome would eventually respond with overwhelming force, crushing the rebellion in the end, the damage had already been done. Not just to infrastructure, not just to control, but to belief. The illusion of invincibility was gone, and the Ninth Legion carried that realization with them, quietly, heavily, like something unresolved, something unfinished. Because even as the rebellion was put down, even as Rome re-established its dominance, there was a lingering truth. Britain had changed them, and whatever came next, they would not face it as the same legion that once marched into this land with certainty. They had seen chaos, they had felt vulnerability, and somewhere deep within their ranks, that feeling remained, waiting. Fire. End of chapter 3. The rebellion was crushed. Rome stood again, but the Ninth Legion was no longer unshaken. Something had broken, and soon they would be sent into the north, into a place even Rome struggled to understand.
After the fires of rebellion had burned out, Rome did what it always did. It restored order. Cities were rebuilt, roads repaired, authority reestablished. On the surface, everything returned to normal. But beneath that surface, something had shifted. Britain was no longer just a distant province. It was unstable, unpredictable, and dangerous in ways Rome could not fully control. Reports began to come in from the north, beyond the established territories, beyond the reach of Roman structure. There were movements, tribes gathering, forces organizing, not openly, not in ways that could be easily confronted, but enough to create concern, enough for Rome to act. The empire could not allow another uprising, not after Boudicca, not after the damage that had already been done. So a decision was made, firm, calculated, strategic. A legion would move north, not to defend, not to wait, but to eliminate the threat before it could grow. And the legion chosen for that mission was Legio IX Hispana. On paper, it made sense. Despite the losses they had taken, the Ninth was still experienced, still capable, still one of Rome's most battle-tested forces in Britain. They knew the land. They had survived it. They understood, at least in part, how war was fought there. But there was something unspoken behind that decision, something quieter, something more uncertain, because the Ninth had already been changed by Britain. They were no longer the same force that had once marched with absolute confidence. And yet, they were being sent deeper, further than before, into territory that Rome barely understood. The orders themselves were simple. Move north, locate the source of unrest, neutralize it, restore control. There was no mention of how, no clear description of the enemy, no detailed intelligence, just direction, north. And so, they prepared. The camp moved with efficiency, supplies gathered, formations organized, commands passed down through ranks with the same discipline that had defined them from the beginning. On the outside, nothing had changed. Armor still polished, standards still raised, commands still followed without hesitation. But inside, there was something else. The veterans felt it the most. Men who had survived Gaul, men who had stood through the fires of Boudicca's revolt. They didn't speak openly about it, but they understood. This was different. Not just another mission, not just another march. There was a weight to it, a silence around it, as if even Rome didn't fully know what they were sending them into. The march began like any other, disciplined, ordered, controlled. Columns of soldiers moving in perfect formation,
equipment carried with precision, standards held high. From a distance, it looked like strength, like certainty. But the further north they moved, the more that certainty began to fade. The land changed, gradually at first, then completely. The roads became less defined, then disappeared entirely. Forests thickened, hills rose unevenly, the air grew colder, and the fog, it returned, not as a passing inconvenience, but as a constant presence. It rolled across the land in waves, thick, heavy, blinding. Sometimes it would lift just enough to reveal shapes in the distance, then close again before those shapes could be understood. Scouts were sent ahead, more frequently now, and again, some returned, some didn't. The reports they brought back were vague, unclear, fragments of information that didn't form a complete picture. Movement in the distance, figures watching from tree lines, signs of camps abandoned before arrival. It was as if the enemy was always just out of reach, always aware, always one step ahead. The deeper they went, the more isolated they became. Supply lines stretched thin, communication slowed, the connection to the rest of Roman Britain weakened. And still, the orders did not change. Move forward, keep going, find the threat, end it. There was no instruction to turn back, no suggestion of caution, only progress, relentless, unquestioned. Days turned into weeks, the march continued, and with every step, the presence around them grew stronger. Not visible, not direct, but undeniable. They were being watched, constantly, not just by enemies, but by something more patient, more controlled. At night, the camps felt different, quieter, heavier. The usual sounds of soldiers talking, laughing, resting became subdued, replaced by listening, waiting. Every crack of a branch, every movement in the darkness, every shift in the wind felt intentional. The fires burned lower now, not for comfort, but for necessity. Too much light felt dangerous, too visible. The 9th Legion was still moving, still following orders, still functioning as a unit. But something had changed. Not in their structure, not in their discipline, but in their awareness. Because now they understood something they didn't before. They were no longer advancing into enemy territory. They were inside it, completely. And whatever was out there had allowed them to come this far, on purpose. The realization didn't come all at once. It settled slowly, quietly, like fog filling empty space, until it became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a mission anymore. It was a setup, and by the time that thought fully formed, they were already too deep to escape it. End of Chapter 4. The 9th Legion had followed orders without question. North, deeper, further than any Roman force should have gone. And now, they were alone, surrounded by something they couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't control.
Chapter 5. The Last March. The 9th Legion was no longer marching into territory, it was marching into a trap. The northern forests stretched endlessly. Hills rose and fell in deceptive waves, hiding valleys that seemed to appear and vanish with every step. Mist clung to the trees like a living thing, moving with the wind but never in a predictable way. For the soldiers, the march began like any other.
Discipline held, formations remained tight, standards waved proudly, but there was a quiet unease growing among the men. Scouts reported with vague reports, small groups of figures glimpsed and then gone, tracks in the mud that didn't match any known tribe, strange sounds, hooves or something else echoing in the distance, shadows that shifted just out of view. The men whispered in low voices. Commanders dismissed it as nerves. They were soldiers of Rome, after all. Fear was a tool, not a weakness, but the sense of being watched refused to leave them. Then came the first disappearances. A patrol sent to recon a nearby hill vanished completely. No screams, no evidence, just empty trees and disturbed earth. When the Ninth sent more to find them, those too disappeared, leaving only silence and confusion. The men began to notice a pattern, slowly at first, unsettling. The further north they went, the fewer men remained, not from battle, not from disease, but from something worse, vanishing. No bodies, no struggle, no trace, just men gone. It became impossible to keep track of who was still present. Platoons reported missing men that had been marching beside them only moments before. Supply lines faltered, horses returned alone, riders nowhere to be found. And yet the march continued. Orders were clear, Rome had commanded it, and the Ninth Legion had always obeyed. Into the heart of northern Britain they moved. The terrain grew harsher, the fog grew thicker, strange landmarks appeared, stones stacked unnaturally, trees twisted into impossible shapes, rivers that seemed to flow backward. The soldiers whispered superstitions about spirits, curses, gods watching them. The command laughed at it, but deep down even the leaders were unsettled. Then came the final days. The Legion was broken, not in formation, not in spirit, but in numbers. Scouts disappeared daily. Soldiers vanished from the main column. Units that marched together for decades were now fractions, stragglers clinging to any semblance of cohesion. And the land, it seemed alive. It shifted, it revealed paths that should not exist and swallowed paths that had been clear moments before. The Legion moved forward, but forward became meaningless. Distances stretched, hours felt like days, days felt like months. By the last reported sighting, the Ninth Legion was still marching. The eagle standard waved above them. They were a shadow of what they had once been, yet they carried discipline to the end. Then they vanished. No battle, no enemy confrontation, no collapse, just absence. Rome searched, tribes were questioned, scouts sent, settlements investigated. Nothing. No trace of bodies, no remains of the Legion, no record beyond the last known reports. 9,000 soldiers gone, and history recorded nothing more than the disappearance itself. Some whispered it was an ambush, an enemy massacre hidden from Roman records. Others claimed the Legion was disbanded in secret, quietly absorbed into other units. A few dared to suggest something darker, something that cannot be explained by human action alone. Whatever the truth, it was final, absolute, complete. The Ninth Legion had disappeared. End of Chapter 5. They marched into the north and never were seen again. The empire continued, Rome endured, but one question haunted every historian, every soldier, every generation that tried to understand what had happened. How do 9,000 men vanish without a trace? Chapter 6. The Vanishing. The Ninth Legion was gone. No bodies, no battle, no trace. Rome was stunned. Reports from the north were unclear. Scouts found abandoned campsites, Intact shields, weapons scattered, food untouched. Yet no soldiers. Nothing suggested a traditional battle. The Empire demanded answers. Legends say the Emperor himself questioned surviving commanders, but even the most disciplined men could only shrug. They didn't know. They hadn't seen the end. And so, history grew quiet. Centuries later, historians still debate. Scholars have tried to reconstruct the final march, but the evidence is scarce. What we do know is chilling. 9,000 soldiers vanished completely. The legacy. Despite the mystery, the Ninth Legion left a mark. Tales of ghostly soldiers persisted for centuries. Archaeologists occasionally found Roman artifacts far north of any known campsites, but never in the context of a battle. The disappearance became a cautionary tale. Even the greatest army can vanish when the unknown becomes the enemy. To this day, the fate of Legio IX Hispana fascinates, terrifies, and haunts. 9,000 men, elite soldiers of Rome, vanishers, ghosts in the northern mists, and one question remains unanswered. What truly happened to them? End of chapter 6. The mystery persists. History holds only the silence of the lost, and the fog of northern Britain continues to guard its secret. Chapter 7. Legacy and Myth. The Ninth Legion did not return. Rome rebuilt. Borders were reinforced. New legions were stationed in Britain. Life went on. But the story of Ninth Hispana lingered. It became more than history. It became myth. Stories spread across the empire. Soldiers marching into fog and never seen again. Banners waving silently in empty forests. Voices carried on the wind, whispering orders that would never be obeyed. Ghosts of the Ninth. Some say the Ninth never truly left. Roman artifacts found far from known settlements. Ancient tribes spoke of shadows moving like soldiers in the night. Travelers reported hearing the clanging of armor in the mist, long after the land should have been silent. The disappearance became a legend, a warning, a story told to young soldiers. Even the strongest army can vanish if it underestimates the unknown. Theories persist. Historians still debate. Was it massacre? Was it disease? Or something else beyond explanation? Every theory explains a piece of the puzzle, but no theory explains all of it. And that is what keeps the Ninth Legion alive in memory. The certainty that 9,000 men, the pride of Rome, vanished without trace. Not a victory, not a defeat, just gone. The haunting question. Perhaps this is why the Ninth captivates us even today. Because it is impossible. Because it is unanswered. Because it forces us to ask, what lies beyond the map? What waits in the fog where men vanish never to return? The answer is unknown, and maybe it should remain so. End of chapter 7, or epilogue. Legio IX Hispana marches forever in the shadows of history. A cautionary tale, a legend, a ghost army that refuses to rest, and the mists of northern Britain continue to guard their secret. 9,000 soldiers, trained to conquer, built to survive, erased without a trace. No battlefield, no survivors, no answers. An empire that recorded everything chose to remember nothing. Legio IX Hispana did not fall in glory. It did not retreat in defeat. It simply disappeared. And maybe that's what makes this story so unsettling. Because somewhere in the cold northern mists of Britain, the story didn't end. Some say on certain nights you can still hear them.
the sound of marching armor echoing through the fog, a legion still searching for its way back. What do you think happened to the Ninth Legion? Was it massacre, betrayal, or something far more mysterious? Tell us your theory in the comments. And if you want to explore more forgotten mysteries of history, subscribe and step deeper into the unknown.